from the IMF. The backdrop of your visit is one of challenge and opportunity, and since the fund's last assessment of the UK economy in February 2022, our world and the economy has been challenged fundamentally by Putin's illegal war in Ukraine, and the whole continent is feeling the knock-on effects. So since becoming Chancellor, my central mission has been to restore macroeconomic stability and deliver our priorities to halve inflation, grow the economy and get debt falling. Today, the IMF's assessment shows that we are on the right track. Their report forecasts growth of 0.4% in 2023, a 0.7 percentage point upgrade versus the April forecast. That's even higher than the Bank of England's forecast published last week for 0.25% growth in 23. The IMF also say we've acted decisively to fight inflation, which will substantially reduce to around 5% by the end of the year. And the IMF say that our approach to fiscal policy will help to significantly reduce the deficit over the forecast by 3% of GDP between 22-23 and 27-28. So together these forecasts demonstrate that we're on the right path, but the job is not done yet. Growing the economy is one of our top priorities, so we were pleased to see the IMF agree with the need for ambitious, evidence-based structural reforms to support growth, because that is what we are delivering. At Spring Budget, I announced measures to grow the economy, focusing on 4 key areas: employment, education, enterprise, and everywhere. And the OBR judged these policies, including a major expansion of childcare support, will result in 110,000 more individuals in the labour market by 27-28, directly increasing employment by 0.3% and GDP by 0.2%. The OBR also say that full expensing would boost business investment by almost 3.5% in 4.5 and 5.6. And today the IMF say these supply-side measures should have a positive effect on medium-term growth, and we will continue this work. But despite the positive news, I know that high inflation and energy prices, issues shared internationally, remain key challenges for us in the UK. People are worried about the cost of living, which is why I announced the extension of the energy price guarantee in the spring, why we're delivering cost of living payments to more than 7 million households, and why we're freezing fuel duty to keep more money in people's pockets. Like the government, the IMF recognise inflation is a major challenge for the UK economy and affirm that we're taking the right course to support the Bank of England in their efforts to combat inflation. And I know that the IMF agree that we have amongst the best macroeconomic institutions and frameworks anywhere to respond to these challenges. Finally, I'm pleased the IMF have recognised our work to reduce uncertainty for households and businesses in the face of some of the biggest challenges we face. That includes agreeing the Windsor framework, which the IMF say will favourably impact business investment, setting the conditions for long-term growth with world-leading ambitions and legal frameworks for our net zero goals, and ensuring our banking sector remains well-capitalised and resilient to shocks. So we're working every day to grow our economy and deliver on this and the other government priorities. The IMF say that we are doing just that. So thank you, Kristalina, to you and your team for all their work. And I'll now hand over to you.
Thank you very much, Chancellor. Good morning, everyone, and a very warm welcome to this IMF press conference on the UK Article 4 consultation. We're very pleased to be here with so many of you this morning. And of course, greetings also to those of you who are watching us online. My name is Julie Kozak. I'm the Director of Communications for the IMF, and I will be moderating the discussion today. You should have all received the relevant document, our concluding statement. I will now turn to Kristalina Georgieva, our Managing Director, to make some opening remarks, after which we will turn to your questions. Kristalina, over to you.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Chancellor, for the warm welcome. Great to be in London on a sunny day. And I want to start by expressing my congratulations to the people of the United Kingdom for the coronation that took place recently. His Majesty King Charles III, Queen Camilla. May their reign be a time of prosperity for this great country. Now, turning to the economy. The UK authorities have taken decisive and responsible steps in recent months. This has promoted macroeconomic and financial stability during a time of heightened market volatility. Their efforts and the recent decline in energy prices are beginning to have a favorable impact on the economy. We now anticipate positive GDP growth of 0.4% for 2023, a 0.7 percentage point upgrade over our forecast from early spring, which was, as you might recall, minus 0.3%. At the same time, as we also heard from the Chancellor, inflation remains elevated. This reflects the impact of adverse terms of trade shock from Russia's war in Ukraine and historically tight labor markets. They are still recovering from the pandemic. We expect the impact of these factors to ease, and together with tight monetary and fiscal policies, bring inflation down to the Bank of England's 2% target by mid-2025. There are significant risks to this outlook. Why? The global economy remains highly uncertain. A sudden tightening in global financial conditions could restrain credit and export demand and depress GDP. High inflation could feed into price and wage setting expectations, which would keep inflation elevated for longer, and therefore it would necessitate tighter policies to bring it back to target. So what we have in this challenging context is a very responsible action from Bank of England, tightening of monetary policy, and the spring and autumn budgets that are aligning fiscal policy with the objective of monetary policy to fight inflation and to stabilize debt over time. We would like to stress that a lot of credit is due to the re-establishing of financial stability in the UK after the pension fund stress episode last fall, and also how decisively authorities here acted at the first sign of financial distress in the US. We very much welcome the Windsor Agreement. It resolves disputes around the Northern Ireland Protocol with positive impact on the business environment. So let me finish with the 4 priorities we recommend in our concluding statement. First, monetary policy. Remain tight in order to keep inflation expectations well anchored. Bring inflation to target. We might see some additional tightening of conditions. We may see rates staying for a longer time higher. But this is a necessity to bring ease to households in the United Kingdom. Cost of living is impacting especially the more vulnerable among them severely. We need to see real incomes recovering and people having the opportunity to see tangible improvements in their lives. Second, Fiscal policy needs to stay aligned with monetary policy to fight inflation and to rebuild fiscal buffers. What we recognize is that in the medium term, the fiscal strategy will have to account for spending pressures to ensure adequate service delivery, especially in healthcare, and also to bring more investments in skills, in innovation, in infrastructure, in the green transition. Third, financial sector policies. The authorities have done a good job to keep financial stability in focus. That needs to continue. Strong oversight of both large and small banks, monitoring of liquidity buffers, and at the same time, don't lose sight of the non-banking financial sector where vulnerabilities might get exposed in tight financial conditions. Important that the financial regulatory reform protects UK financial stability. We at the fund take it to be a global public good. It's very important for people of the UK, but it is important for the world as a whole. I want to finish with what is so positive in the policies of the government. Emphasis on structural reforms to sustainably boost the UK's growth potential. We strongly endorse the measures already taken, the increase of childcare support, the introduction of capital investment allowance in the spring budget, and we see that the Chancellor's 4E vision, enterprise, education, employment everywhere. We see that as being a concept that practically would make a difference for the competitiveness and the growth potential of the UK. Targeting key growth areas, advanced manufacturing, life sciences, clean energy, that is all on the right track. So what do we propose in the concluding statement? More of those evidence-based reforms. The policy and regulatory regime for businesses can be made more stable to boost investment with wider, and we think best to make it permanent capital investment incentives, smaller firms' access to finance and R&D support can be strengthened, and investing in skill, education and healthcare can enhance labor market productivity, critical for growth. So, to sum it up, where are we? Like the weather outside, the outlook for the UK economy has improved, but in a context of a highly uncertain global environment, structural challenges and still very high inflation. The UK authorities have demonstrated their ability to overcome hurdles in difficult times, and we look forward to continuing our constructive collaboration for strong and inclusive growth in the United Kingdom. Thank you very much, and now I see questions popping up.
Yes. So thank you very much, Kristalina. We'll now turn to your questions. I would ask that you please identify yourself and your outlet, and please limit yourself to one question. We'd like to take as many questions as possible. Let's start here. Mehreen.
Hello, Managing Director. Mehreen Khan from The Times. The IMF has been consistently accused of being a bit too gloomy about the UK's growth prospects, particularly after Brexit. And today we've seen this is a second upgrade in 2 months, a 1.3 percentage point swing from what you're forecast in January. Does that actually vindicate the fact that you have underestimated the UK's resilience? And have you asked yourself the question as to why you seem to keep getting it so wrong?
Let me give you the factuals as to why we are upgrading the projections for growth for the UK. And there are 3 factors behind. One, when we did our previous projection, it was in the midst of financial stress in the US, as well as the event in Switzerland. And at that time, we have not yet seen what we now see, the positive of the decisive action of Bank of England. As you know, there was a risk with the subsidiary of the US bank here in the UK that was resolved instantaneously, decisively, and overall the demonstrable strength in dealing with these stresses in the UK is a source of confidence. Two, we are now seeing in the surveys the benefits of more predictable relations with the EU coming from the Windsor Agreement, and that is boosting confidence as well. Three, energy prices have receded, and they are giving us some different perspectives. So when we look at the increase in the projections, they're basically confidence measures taken by the authorities. Congratulations for those, as well as some improvement in global conditions.
Thank you. Right here in the middle.
Thanks. Phil Aldrich at Bloomberg. Given the limited fiscal space which you describe, would you say that tax cuts should be a priority policy, or what other policies would you recommend?
What we see is that the government is prioritizing, and rightly so, the fight against inflation. Inflation is a tax on the British people, and in that sense, bringing it down is the most immediate benefit for incomes that the government can and is determined to deliver. In the medium term, we do recommend measures that can increase the capacity of the government to invest in structural measures. More specifically, we recommend closing down some of the tax loopholes, making the valuation of real estate more accurate, more aligned with where we are today, and also looking into the potential for more aggressive action on carbon tax that would incentivize more investments in the green transition and actually likely add to the competitiveness of the British economy.
Let's go over here. Joel?
Joel Hills from ITV News. When do you think living standards will begin to rise again in the UK?
Well, we do see the UK economy growing moderately in the next years. And of course, this is a very important condition for living standards to improve in the UK. We are very encouraged by the focus of the government on structural reforms to boost growth. And we think that the implementation of these steps that can bring a growth to a higher level in the UK can help to improve living standards in the country. So we are talking about the medium term. Over the next years, 2025, 26, 27, we are seeing these improvements paying back to the British people. Of course, we also are very hopeful to see more of those who are currently outside of the labor market getting an opportunity to contribute to the economy. And this attention to skills as well as to opportunities in other parts of the country that may be suppressed today is so important to bring, as the Chancellor would say, chance for prosperity everywhere.
Right here at the end.
Hello, hi. Ed Conway from Sky News. Managing Director, I wonder if you remember back in Washington saying to the Chancellor on the economic forecasts, I hope you prove us wrong. Well, it looks like maybe he did prove you wrong. I just wonder how important is it, how big of a deal is it if the IMF does keep getting things wrong? Does that damage your reputation, do you think? And what do you say to people here who are saying, Why should we pay any attention to the IMF this time around?
Well, thank you for your question. So let me say two things. One, that when you take a good look at the projections done by Bank of England, consensus projections, and the IMF, we are actually slightly less pessimistic than others have been. Two, we have gone through a very turbulent time over the last years. We have experienced shock upon shock upon shock, and that has created exceptional uncertainty. I actually think that our staff, my colleagues, deserve credit for being agile in how we look at changing conditions and being fast to adjust projections so we can give as clear a picture as we can at the time that you would agree is the foggiest we have seen in many decades.
Let's say David, please, in the middle.
Thank you. David Milliken from Reuters. You talked about the sort of highly uncertain sort of global environment. Could you say sort of what the consequences would be if the United States doesn't reach an agreement on sort of the debt ceiling? Would that mean sort of a recession for the United States? Would that bring a global recession?
We have seen historically that the discussions on debt ceiling in the United States have always been quite tense, but always resulted in a solution being found. Why? Because it is clear that lack of solution would have a detrimental impact on the US economy and on the global economy. So I look forward to a solution being found this time around. It is, you're correct to place your question the way you did. That would have implications not just for the US, it would have implications for the world economy. Non-desirable implications, so let's see how much this would be driven to the 11th hour. Hopefully, we won't have to wait that long.
Thank you. Faisal at the end.
Hi, Faisal Islam, BBC News. Can you expand upon how your fears about how sticky inflation is proving in the UK and around the world, and will that require interest rates to go ever higher?
What we're seeing is headline inflation seems to have reached the peak and is now receding. And it is the result of strong and coordinated actions of central banks. But headline inflation, the core inflation is stickier. And within the core inflation, what is most concerning is food prices being the toughest to bring down. Not just in the UK, this is everywhere. In this environment of core inflation, even with energy prices trimming down, staying as high as it is, it does mean that interest rates will have to remain higher for longer. The discussion around interest rates has somewhat shifted from how high to for how long, because headline inflation is receding. And at this point, the critical action is this alignment of monetary and fiscal policy that the UK has achieved, and the understanding that there should be no premature exit from tighter financial conditions because of the risk that would bring to wage price correlation in the future. For how long? The projections for the UK are that we would see in mid-25 reaching the 2% target. But of course, we have to stay vigilant and be data-driven. Bank of England, the Chancellor, need to watch the dynamics in prices carefully.
Okay, let's go right here.
Hello, John Paul Ford-Rojas from the Daily Mail. You talked about your forecasters being agile. Some of the things that you cite in the report on the upgrade include the budget, energy prices coming down, and the Windsor framework, things which had all happened prior to the previous forecast in April. So I just wondered whether actually, rather than a forecast, it's more sort of looking in the rearview mirror, and you need to be a lot more agile, and perhaps even whether you think you need to think about more carefully about the way that you you do your forecasts, because as various other people have noted, this is not the first time you've been a bit too gloomy about the UK.
The projections we do and publish in April are actually based on data from mid-March. So there is this lag that influences how much we can integrate in this projection. You're right, some of the confidence-building steps were taken earlier, but their reflection in sentiments has only been demonstrably assessed now. So when we did the projections in mid-March, at that time, the concerns around financial stability and the impact of the stress that we have seen in US mid-sized banks, and also the case in Switzerland, the concern was much more severe. The agreements around relations with the EU, not very clear at that time how they would impact business sentiment. Now this is clear. Now this is clear, and therefore, when we disintegrate the 0.7, we can point exactly to what were the percentage points where we were more conservative at that time, and we are not now. But this is the technicality of the answer. What we are debating at the IMF today is, at the time of more frequent and severe shocks and exceptional uncertainty, how do we communicate our forecasts? Should we be using our traditional baseline projection or offering a range of projections? And this is a debate not just at the IMF, this is a discussion in the economics community. We are in a world that has changed, more shock-prone world, and one in which the impact of shocks translate into a highly unpredictable set of responses across countries. No question, economic policy need to be more agile in this environment. And the question is not whether it should be more agile, the question is how do we operate in a more uncertain environment and yet deliver policy predictability for businesses and households.
Delphine.
It's Delphine from the Financial Times. What's your recommendation on fiscal policy in the run-up to the next election?
This is why, Chancellor, maybe
Shall I leave?
your choice to stay. This is really a question that is best addressed to the government, to the Prime Minister, the Chancellor. From our perspective, from the position of the IMF, we find that this government has been very prudent to prioritize not what is politically easy, but what is right for the British people. And I am very encouraged by the way priorities for the budget, for the fiscal policy, have been set. Fighting inflation, clearly #1 priority, given the high numbers of inflation. Improving the growth prospects by putting evidence-based structural measures in place, and being determined to take decisions that are benefiting people across the United Kingdom. I think that so far we see a determination that is above the political fray.
Sue.
Hi, Sue Chan from The Telegraph. You outlined a range of policies that you think can boost growth, but another thing that the Chancellor has been looking at is unlocking billions of pounds of pension investments through a series of reforms that can make us more like Australia or Canada. Do you think there's an opportunity to boost growth there by allowing funds to invest in more productive assets?
Well, this is certainly a decision that the country, different countries take differently based on how they prioritize financial stability, growth. These are trade-offs that have to be done very carefully. But the answer is yes, we do see potential for increasing investments in the growth potential, in growth in the United Kingdom. And we leave it to the authorities here to come up with the exact pathway for that.
Okay, gentleman in the middle here.
Hi there, Jack Bonnet from City AM. Just touching back on fiscal policy and potential tax cuts in the run-up into the election. I just wonder whether or not you had an assessment of what that would mean from the Bank of England's point of view. You've obviously talked to the fact that fiscal policy and monetary policy still need to be aligned to tackle inflation. If there's tax cuts potentially in the run-up to the next election, does that complicate the Bank of England's position?
I mean, at this point, there is no intention to go for tax cuts because, again, the government is rightly prioritizing the alignment of fiscal policy with monetary policy. We think that that alignment will have to stay for quite some time because the government is aiming to get inflation down by half by the end of the year. That is not a trivial goal, but in our view it is achievable, and the direction to travel is the right direction. One thing in our concluding statement you might have noticed is that we now expect the 2% target to be met 6 months later, and therefore that priority of bringing inflation down has to be ingrained in policy for as long as it takes. And it is going to take a little longer than initially anticipated.
Okay, thank you. We have time for 2 more questions. So we'll take the gentleman here and then the gentleman here.
Hello. Matthew Davis here from The National. Given your upgrade to 0.4% growth, how does this now compare with our friends in the G7 and perhaps the G20?
It compares favorably. We are seeing an improvement in the position of the UK in terms of growth prospects. We are likely to see the UK performing better than Germany, for example. One mistake that we often make, and I'm saying that not for the press, for all of us, is that we focus on 1 year. And 1 year is not the very best way to judge performance of a country. If you look at the last 3 years, then actually the UK's performance is quite good vis-a-vis the rest of the G7. I believe UK would be number 3 in the G7 context. So I think we have to recognize that the last month since the spring, there has been a very significant turnaround in policy, and that is bringing benefits to the UK and the people of the UK.
And then last question over here.
Hi, my name's Philip Inman from The Guardian. I was going to, as the last questioner, I was just going to steal 2 questions. One was to press you a little harder on tax cuts. Could you say, because there is a lobby for tax cuts, could you say to them whether you do believe that tax cuts are a route to growth? Could you be a bit more categorical in your response to that? I know you say there are no plans for tax cuts, but there is a lobby for it. And also, do you think in 5 years you'll be coming back and talking about GDP? There's a lot of backlash against GDP as a measure of the health of the economy. Do you think you'll still be talking about GDP in 5 years?
Well, I think I'm going to tolerate 2 questions because they're both important and interesting questions, if you allow me. So, to your first question, the focus on fighting inflation, and I repeat that, it is so important because inflation is a tax, and it is the heaviest on the poor. So getting inflation under control is the right objective at the time when we are seeing record high levels for over decades. When we say we are beyond that time when the fight against inflation is a priority, then we look into how the UK can grow faster and in a more sustainable manner. And that would put pressure on increasing spending in some key areas. Well, that has to be funded. And to be funded, that would require a very careful look at revenues. We have come up with a list of measures that would increase revenues, and we recommend to the Chancellor to go through that list and see whether there could be a better revenue side in light of this pressure to increase spending. So clearly that, I mean, let me say that, of course, it is attractive to look into ways in which the tax burden is lighter, to inject more investment opportunity, but only when it is affordable. And at this point of time, neither it is affordable nor it is desirable, because if you want to reduce, to constrain demand and increase supply, you have to think what are the right policy measures for it. To your second question, we all know that GDP is a good indicator, but not perfect by a long mile. Just to give you one example, if you are, say if I hire a gardener and I pay the gardener, that increases GDP. If I decide to marry the gardener, that would decrease GDP. If you look at the impact of pollution, actually investing in activities that degrade our environment expands GDP. So we have to work hard on helping policymakers to have a better set of indicators to make decisions on. At the fund, we have a very significant program on closing gaps in how the functioning of the economy is measured, including by looking into carbon intensity, vulnerability to climate shocks, indicators that expand our understanding beyond GDP. But is GDP helpful? Yes. So to answer your question, don't throw the baby with the bathwater, but hey, let's give the baby good quality food, let it grow.
Well, with that, thank you very much, Managing Director, and thank you to all of you and those online who've joined us today. If there's any additional requests, you can reach out to the IMF's Media Relations team. And now I would invite the Chancellor to make some final remarks.
Thank you. I just want to finish by thanking Kristalina and her Article 4 team, Ali, Alfred, everyone who's worked very hard to make today's report possible. What we've heard is a decisive vote of confidence in UK economic management, but we also hear the warnings about global instability and risk, and I want to reassure you that we will stick to our plan to keep inflation down and halve it and get growth going, and there will be a relentless focus on that by me and the Prime Minister going forward. But thank you very much indeed.